everyone. Welcome to the relaunch of Informed Dissent. Each week, your hosts, myself, Jamie Reed, alongside Lauren Leggieri and Cori Cohn, will dig into the gender culture wars. We'll report on the news, share some of our own experiences, and tackle some of the tough questions. From school policy to social transition to lawsuit, medical controversies, and even what the word gender really means, Informed Dissent is here to cut through the noise and get to some of the truth. Now, Cori isn't with us today because he's going to be out observing Rosh Hashanah. He'll be back next week. And that makes this a perfect time to introduce to you our new co-host, Lauren Leggieri. We also want to thank Ben Appel, Lisa Sellen Davis, and Sarah Mittmeyer for their previous time sharing host as the mic. All three will be having books coming out, and we hope that we'll have them back as guests as their books are released. Ben's book is going to be first out. It is going to be called Cis White Gay, and it is available for pre-order now. Let's introduce Lauren. So Lauren is a dedicated LGBT advocate and been a driving force in the movement to end pediatric gender transitions across the United States. She's currently the co-executive director of the LGBT Courage Coalition, where she works to mobilize volunteers, direct actions. She's been at the center of some of these significant moments so far in the fight. Protest at the 2024 Endocrine Society Conference in Boston, leading actions at the American Academy of Pediatrics in Orlando, and even freezing your butt off standing outside of the U.S. Supreme Court during the U.S. Scarametti hearing. What makes Lauren so powerful as a voice in this movement is that she's lived it. She's a gender nonconforming lesbian from the East Coast with a background in literature and philosophy from Rutgers, a former contractor who was canceled for refusing to back down from her views, and a long-time yoga practitioner. How do you say the type of yoga?
Ashtanga.
Ashtanga yoga practitioner with a deep understanding of the mind-body connection. With her work, her intellect, and her courage, which has made her a vital part of this conversation, we now welcome her as one of our weekly co-hosts here on Informed Dissent. Before we dive into Lauren's story, we want to catch up on a few headlines that have been shaping Genderland this week. So, one of the wins, back in August, New Hampshire became the latest state to ban puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries for minors. This week, Governor Kelly Ayotte signed these laws into action with bipartisan support. Kids who have already been started are going to be able to continue, but this is another sign the momentum on youth medicalization is shifting, even in a purple state on the Blue Coast. In Michigan, another hospital system announced that it's going to stop prescribing puberty blockers and hormones to minors. This is Corewell Health. But what was interesting is one of the citations was about liability, showing that hospitals are becoming increasingly nervous about lawsuits and regulatory exposure, even in states that lean blue. On the media front, Ezra Klein sat down with Ta-Nehisi Coates for a long discussion that included some tiptoeing around gender identity in politics. What stood out wasn't just what they covered, but what they didn't. Klein seemed to continue to tiptoe around the medicalization of children, leaving that part of the conversation untouched, even as it has become a central fault line in what seems to be his kind of year-long trying to figure out why the Democrats lost. So, Lauren, I know you were a previous Ezra Klein fan. Did you get a sense that Klein and Coates were circling around the real issue and they're still refusing to touch them? Yet somehow now every time Klein interviews anyone, there's this 30-second clip that's kind of trans adjacent with Ezra just going around it on X. Did anything stand out for you?
I mean, just the pure absence of substance. I mean, he he really hasn't even tiptoed around it. He's still staying very safely in the we have to use everybody's pronouns because it's polite, very surface um into this whole argument. I mean, you're right. He doesn't touch the medicalization of minors, which a large portion of the public is not behind because it's crazy. He doesn't talk anywhere about women's rights, about women's safety, about the safety of children having any man who identifies as a woman enter their spaces. Uh, I mean, he's had no. I mean, they talk about in this particular episode about how we keep losing people, we keep losing people, but they don't talk about why. Like they don't, and they don't talk to those people. They
Yeah.
don't talk to those disaffected liberals who are like, "I'm out. This isn't what I signed up for. This isn't the liberal party that I belong to." Um, and to me, it sounded like I don't know. They didn't say there was almost nothing of substance in that article or in that podcast, and that's increasingly what I hear from Ezra Klein, particularly on this issue. And really, anything else they talked about was kind of lacking in substance too. It was political theater, as they're talking about how we need to get away from political theater. So, no, thank you, Ezra. You've lost me, and you've lost the plot.
Also in the news, for those who are deep in gender world, we just wrapped up two major conferences. The Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine held a conference in Berlin, and the most recent Genspect conference just wrapped up in Albuquerque. Both of those organizations have waded back into the debate over what belongs in the DSM. We're not going to dive into that today, but next week, when our co host Cori Cohn is back, we're going to do a detailed episode we're going to call The Tale of Two Conferences. Lauren, you were at Genspec and Segum?
Yep.
Both.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's going to be kind of our deep dive next week. Both agencies or organizations are starting to talk about what belongs in the DSM. All right, so that's what we're going to cover for this week in the news. We're going to turn over and have a pretty deep conversation with you, Laura, just so that everybody can get a sense of who you are, and maybe where you come from. So I want to start with a case that I believe has been really formative for you. So that's the Gavin Grimm case. For listeners who might not remember or maybe weren't familiar, Gavin Grimm was a high school student in the state of Virginia. This was a
I
girl.
think it was North Carolina.
Oh, you're probably right. It was a girl who was identifying as a boy who wanted to use the boys' bathroom. They were in high school. The school board denied the request, and what started as a local policy fight then turned into a national court battle. In 2016, the Fourth Circuit ruled in Grimm's favor, and after a year of appeals, the Supreme Court declined to hear the case in 2021, leaving that ruling in place. For many activists, it became a rallying cry for trans rights, particularly around bathrooms in schools. But you said something when you very first saw this story that it immediately set off an alarm bell for you. Can you explain what happened and how you reacted at the time?
Um, Short answer, I reacted with horror because so I had already been primed um because in my early 20s most of my butch lesbian friends started transitioning. So for me, I had already been primed to think like there's a connection to homosexuality here that needs to be explored. It seems to me that this is internalized homophobia and um so when I initially heard of this Gavin Grimm case, like I had kind of tangentially heard maybe trans kids. It wasn't super all over the narrative back then, but like, and I was just, what does this even mean? I guess I thought what a lot of people think now is that we're just talking about kids expressing themselves, right? Um, but I read, and of course everybody was talking about this case, and at first I would say I was like, I don't really see the deal. I don't see the big deal, I guess. Like it's just one kid, one bathroom. And then I read this article that was I do not remember what magazine it was in or newspaper it came out of, but I know it would have been liberal and left leaning because that was how I identified all of my life politically ish. And I lived in Philadelphia, which is decidedly very liberal. So I'm reading this article and they're talking about how they don't want to let Gavin use the boys' restroom. And I'm like, okay, but we're still talking about a girl. And then and then you read when I'm reading the article, they start listing like, Gavin has been on hormones for 18 months and has already had his top surgery, and they still won't let him use the bathroom. And I'm like, wait, what? Like, what do you mean? Like, I just real quick was like, what, like 18 months, this kid had not yet graduated high school. So at most, this kid is 16, 17. And then you go back 18 months from that, and I'm like, wait a minute. You're talking about a 14-year-old has been on hormones and has had a double mastectomy. And I was like, these are gay kids. It just clicked in my head. Like, these are gay kids. This person probably would have grown up to be a lesbian like myself. And again, all the people I've seen transitioned as quote unquote adults, I don't know that I would use the term adults now, but at the time, my friends who were transitioning were 19, 20, 21. I think the oldest was 26, but um, we're talking about a 14-year-old in this article. And it was just saying it like it was just normal. Like it's normal to put kids on like a 14-year-old girl on testosterone and have a double mastectomy. And I was like, whoa, wait, am I reading this right? Like, am I understanding what they're saying to me in this article is that they are actually like medically transitioning children? And I immediately was like, these are gay kids. This is wrong. I don't like it. I was very, very upset by it. No one else seemed to share my existential dread because that's the only way I can describe it is that I was struck with a sense of existential dread. I was sick to my stomach for weeks. I could not find any information other than the information that I had already been primed with, like, trans is, there are some people that are trans and it's normal, quote unquote, and like no other narrative was out there. I was digging around, digging around. At some point, it may have been 2016. It may have been 2017. Anyway, first thing I found was Fourth Wave Now, and I was like, just uh, again, horrified. I was like, this cannot be real. This cannot be real. And at that point, it just looked like a blog, right? It was just a blog. And I'm like, I can't be right. I cannot be right about this. And the more and more I dug, those little kernels of evidence I could find just reinforced the fact to me that there's a lot of homosexuals, and now we're talking about proto-gay youth are actually being medicalized. Like, this is insane. It's
Do you
insane.
know, do you know what happened to Gavin Grimm? Like after this case, what became of her?
I did not, but I think there was an article somewhat recently, it had to be within the last year, talking about Gavin not really doing well. I think living in his mom's basement, but they were soon to be evicted, spent a lot of times playing video games, kind of socially isolated, overweight.
Yeah, so there was a follow-up article. It characterized how she's dealt with homelessness, PTSD, seizures. I think identifies or claims that they have autism, real difficulty finding stability. I think it's kind of a good reminder, even though in essence she had a legal victory and she even medicalized as a child, it doesn't necessarily translate into well-being for any vulnerable young people.
Yeah.
Um, so you find fourth wave now. This case kind of, I think sometimes people use the word peaked you. Um,
I don't know that it. it was the I think it was the thing that made me think this has to be stopped because I had already been quite uncomfortable with the idea, having seen so many of my butch lesbian friends transition and then not do well. And it destroyed our relationships. I had a roommate that moved in at one point, moved in as one as a butch lesbian, and then within months decided she was a man, and within months, testosterone double mastectomy. So I had already been, and also like feeling the tension between myself and my formerly butch lesbian friends who now identified as trans men. There was a lot of tension there and
Can you
elevated misogyny. Like they really seemed very unhappy with me. I think perhaps because I could not pretend that I thought this was great. I mean, I had one friend who immediately after top surgery, maybe a week after top surgery, had everybody over and it was supposed to be this like celebratory event, and she like took off like the dressings of the wound, and I was like physically ill. Like I've always been a bit squeamish, but it just hit me so profoundly that I don't think she could ever look me in the eyes again. Like I don't know what my face looked like, but I know that I am not good at hiding how I feel in moments like that, and immediately it destroyed our relationship. She couldn't even look at me after that because I was just so visibly horrified by what I saw.
So at this point, you start to feel like the need to do something.
Yeah, when I found out about Gavin Grimm and I realized we're actually medicalizing kids. Yeah.
So I think that at this point, you maybe go and attend some of the feminist events. Can you maybe?
Well, I would say at this point I started reading some feminist stuff because they were really like, I know people give the feminists a lot of shit, but I mean, they have been talking about this since the 70s. Like, this is a bad idea. So it was really the only perspective I could find. And though it made sense, it didn't particularly, feminist philosophy doesn't particularly resonate with me on a deep level. So, but I still have loads of respect for them. I think they were one of the first people to speak up. At that point, I think this was like 2016, and Trump had just been elected. So I was in real conflict here because I was like in this very liberal area, and I had these feelings and thoughts about this one particular issue, and I knew I could not talk about it. Like there were very few people I could talk to about this where um I wasn't really afraid of what the reaction would be. I mean, nonetheless, I couldn't shut myself up, so lost all my friends because I wouldn't stop talking about it. Um so I think initially people just thought I was some right-wing nut. Um it wasn't until about 2020 that there was really like some real pushback to like you couldn't even disagree with the pronouns thing. The pronouns thing had started to creep up, and I immediately just thought that was ridiculous. I just thought it was ridiculous. Like I was like, no, thank you. This is so stupid. I'm not calling anyone they. Stop asking my pronouns everywhere I go. It's really annoying. To me, it was the same question I'd gotten all my life. Are you a boy or a girl? So 2020 was when I started realizing how volatile people would get about this issue. But again, now I'm seeing it everywhere. I'm seeing it like there are no more lesbian gatherings. If anyone under 30, there's no one that looks like me. They're all transitioning. So I, in my private life, I'm having conversations with people, and so many of these lesbians my age would agree with me, but they would never speak out publicly. And it was always in like hushed tones. And they would just, they'd listen, they understood, but they didn't really want to go there with me. You could tell that they didn't want to actually confront the real horror that this was. Like they were still like, well, I disagree. I think that, and it because I think a lot of people can't go there because once you cross that line of saying this isn't right, then you start to be able to admit just how horrific it all actually is. And in such a polarized society, like I think it makes people feel unmoored if they can't say, yes, I'm definitely on the right. Yes, I'm definitely on the left. I'm a Democrat. I'm a Republican. I'm a liberal. I'm a conservative. And I think people were just so uncomfortable and they were afraid. They were afraid that people would hear me talking to them about it. But these were mostly just private conversations. Some whispering in the gay community. Like I started to get looks if I went to a queer party or whatever, but I really didn't care. It wasn't until I guess it was 2023 when WDI and Karadansky came to Philadelphia for a demonstration. And by that point, I had immersed myself in understanding this topic to a point where it was starting to drive me insane. I needed some kind of outlet. So WDI comes to Philadelphia for a demonstration, and I show up. We had to call the police. We were harassed. We had things thrown at us. At one point, we were all pinned against a brick wall with just a few police officers and a line of, frankly, crazy people screaming at us, not letting us in our Uber. I mean, it opened my eyes to how much danger people have put themselves into just speaking about this. Um, but
I think
again, go ahead.
around that time, so you're starting to interact with Kara and some of the other feminists. Um, you earn a nickname at this time. There might
Oh
be
yeah.
people who remember you from your.
Yeah, they started calling me Triple L because there's so many Laurens and we're all lesbians, so they couldn't call me like lesbian Lauren, so they had to call me Triple L, which actually was is what they called me in high school because my middle initial is also L. So it resonated with me and I kept it, but Karadansky was the first one to rename me Triple L and it's kind of stuck.
It has kind of stuck, yeah. So 2023, let's jump ahead to the Genspect conference. I think the first one in the United States. It's held in Denver.
Mhm.
So at this point, you're well versed enough in this kind of movement, and you are one of those people who buy a ticket for a gender conference, which I'm gonna
Yeah.
admit, it's still rare. There's still, I mean, there's not thousands and thousands of people doing that. It's a smaller number. Um, so you go to this in-person gender conference. What did you think of that experience? Was that like a tipping point? Did it put you off? Who did you interact with?
Oh, I interacted with as many people as possible because it was the first time I could have really in-depth, substantive conversations with people who were just as concerned and just as well versed as I had become. I had initially gone because I heard you on a podcast, and I was like, this is the group I belong with. This is someone who is of the left, who understands the dynamics between and the pressure on homosexuals and why they transition. This is someone who, and a group that really has people's best interests at heart. Um, and I had this idea and I wanted to talk to you about it. And I talked to you and I talked to just about everybody else who attended that conference about it. And here we are. But it was a tipping point for me because I had been dissatisfied with, I mean, in Philadelphia there's no movement happening. There's, you know what I mean? I knew I had to go outside of my comfort zone to start interacting with people because I felt very passionately um that young women like me need a voice. Young, the gay kids, they need a voice. They need us elder gays to start saying what we're seeing here is not good. They need examples because they have no way of conceptualizing themselves anymore as homosexual. They don't. I mean, I was seeing it with my friends' kids who had begun to be indoctrinated into this idea of gender very, very young, um, not be able to understand me. They could not conceptualize me, someone who had been in their life all their life, because I'm gender nonconforming. So I had started to see that there was a real urgent need for people to stand up.
So the next event that we crossed paths at was at the Endocrine Society conference in Boston. This was a conference where we were still making homemade signs, and you made and carried a sign that got some attention. Do you remember what it said, and then what kind of reactions were getting to that sign?
Yeah, well, there were two signs. One sign said, most gender nonconforming kids grow up to be gay, and the other one said, stop transing gay kids. And I lost count. I literally lost count of how many times over that weekend someone read my signs and looked to the person next to them and said, I had never thought of that. And the look of horror that crossed their face. I mean, time after time, it was like a light bulb went off. Oh my God. Because, and this is the way I have piqued so many people is I come in as myself, as a gender nonconforming lesbian, and I say, who do you think masculine little girls grow up to be? Who do you think feminine little boys grow up to be? We all know it. We all knew it and understood it up until about 15 seconds ago, that if you see a very effeminate little boy or a very masculine little girl, they're probably going to grow up to be gay. And we've somehow managed to forget or suppress that widely known information. I mean, of course, now I know that the problem is much bigger than just homophobia or the gay kids, but that is where it started.
So you're in Boston, you've got these signs. You had been floating those concepts around in your head for a while, make the signs. You go back home to Philadelphia, and there's some photographs of you from the time you're in Boston that got shared. Um, what happened? What happened at home after that?
So, I posted the pictures of myself on my personal Facebook page because I wanted people to know, like, if you think this way, you're not alone, because that was the response I would generally get from people who agreed with me is that, they thought they were the only one. They don't think it's safe to speak out. Um, but again, I posted those images, and on Facebook, there's a mechanism where you can say post to everyone, post to just your friends. I was being cautious. I posted only to my friends. So someone in my friend group screenshotted those pictures and kind of proliferated them through multiple avenues of social media, including like some apps, some community apps where I would get a lot of work. And I mean, within weeks, I was realizing like, okay, the phone's not ringing for work because a lot of my business came from the gay community. Um, and it was like poison. I was toxic by association. The people who would engage with me in private conversation wouldn't even do that anymore. They were afraid to be seen with me. So,
What kind of work were you doing?
oh, I'm a home improvement contractor. So like for a while I thought I was safe because most people don't give a shit about their contractors' politics. They just want them to fix the thing. So I had been playing that card for a while, thinking like, whatever, they're just gonna write me off as a idiot working class grunt and they can think whatever they want about their politics. But this issue was different. It was different. And it definitely hurt my business. Like to a point where I had to move. I had to leave. I mean, I had a few friends that stood by me and got it, but even friends I had for 20 years that knew me, loved me, just totally wrote me off. And even some of them agreed with me on principle, but didn't want to be associated with me. So,
So, for listeners who might not be aware, there is this website that's called Transgender Map. Um, it's essentially an online blacklist that publishes the names and the details of people who criticize pediatric transitions. I think it initially started with the goal of shaming or trying an intimidation. So you get canceled in your kind of personal networks and your work networks. And now, more recently, you've shown up on Transgender Map, and your name, your profile, even your birthday, um, is up on that site. What was it like to see yourself listed there? And what do you think that this tells you about how this debate is still going on?
for me personally, I don't care. I don't care what they say about me. I don't care. Um, but I think that particular website has caused a lot of damage and fear for other people, particularly kids, people with children, um, people who are a little more high profile. Um, I can understand people being very upset with being put on that because to me it feels like what it is a hit list. You know, they want people to know who you are and what your views are because you deserve to be either harassed or intimidated, etc. Um, but also I mean, it also, whether they like it or not, serves as a really useful tool for people on our side because it's like a who's who.
Yeah. So you're basically kind of workplace canceled, not deterred, and you end up at another event in Orlando, at the American Academy of Pediatrics.
Well, I was instrumental in planning the event, so that's why I ended up there.
Okay. We'll put a link to an article about this. Can you tell listeners what happened in Orlando and what particularly you got to do and why was this American Academy of Pediatrics conference so important?
Well, number one, the American Academy of Pediatrics has betrayed the trust of parents and children all over the country by promoting gender transition for minors. The evidence is all there. They refuse to acknowledge it. They also refuse to do a systematic review that they've been promising for years now. That would, because of course, that evidence would show them that this is horrible. All of this, all these interventions have no proof that they benefit anyone, and plenty of evidence of harm. So that was the first thing, is that I would really love for the American Academy of Pediatrics to right their own ship, but doesn't look like they're going to do that because instead of backing off even a little, they decided to have Admiral Rachel Levine as their keynote speaker at their conference that year. I I'm not going to bore your listeners. I think everybody knows who Admiral Levine is. But it had come out prior to this conference that he was actively participating in pressuring WPATH to remove age restrictions for interventions. If you can believe that that's a thing, we don't want to have age restrictions on sex change procedures, of course. Um, so I think that incensed a lot of us in the movement that not only were they not course correcting, but they were doubling down. And they were doubling down with um, promoting like the one of the most egregious offenders when you're talking about pushing this down top down. I mean, this is someone who has one of the highest positions in health in the country, possibly in the world, and he's pressuring WPATH to remove age restrictions. This is directly going to affect kids. Um, so we were protesting outside. We managed to get me credentials to get me into the actual conference. Um, so
Are
I
you
went.
are you a doctor?
I am not a doctor.
Are you a pediatrician?
I am not. I am
Okay.
not.
But
But I
okay.
got my little credentials tag, so
Okay.
they don't know the difference. So I get in, I have to listen to a couple hours of really boring um, presentations by pediatricians in front of a like a Sesame Street background. It was a little bizarre. Anyway, um, Admiral Levine gets up to give his keynote speech, and I let him get started. I hit record on my phone, and I stand up and I yell in a very this room was the acoustics in this place were phenomenal. So everyone heard me. And I yelled, "Why did you pressure WPATH to remove age restrictions for minors? How does this help children?" And then I said, most gender nonconforming kids grow up to be gay. Stop transing gay kids. And then I think I kept repeating, "You are all complicit in homosexual conversion." And I just kept yelling these things for the 10 seconds I had before security grabbed me and threw me out and threatened to arrest me and charge me with trespassing, etc., etc. Um,
If you had a badge,
I had a badge, yeah. So what were they going to do?
were you arrested?
I was not arrested. I think the whoever the security was for the actual conference building was kind of just like, we don't want to get into it. I'm not really sure. And then I think the APA may have thought twice about making it a bigger deal than it needed to be.
Hmm.
I don't know, but they did not actually arrest me. They just gave me a citation and told me I could never go back to the Orlando Convention Center again in my life. So, no loss there.
So you've been permanently banned from the Orlando Convention Center.
Permanently banned. Yeah. So that home show I was going to go to, not happening.
Okay. Um, we will put a link. Ben Ryan covered that. And also, another journalist, Jennifer Black, was there, and she ended up including some of that in a short documentary that she put out this year. So we'll share that you're in that documentary as well. I'm gonna pivot a little bit. Um, I want to talk a little bit about this phrase and this concept that's come up a few times about gender conformity, gender nonconformity. Um, so, as a gender nonconforming lesbian in public life, have you found that there's been a shift in the last decade or two in a positive, negative way towards your appearance? Um, what do people think when they meet you? And then also maybe share a little bit about what a couple people said most recently at the Genspect conference as well.
Yeah, so I think the whole trans thing has really made it almost impossible to be a gender nonconforming person at all. In the last 5 to 6 years, I've never experienced more problems using public restrooms. I've experienced more hostility from people. People are very confused as to which sex I am. They just they can't figure it out. They're always asking me for my pronouns, or then they just assume that my pronouns are they or he, but they never assume my pronouns are she. People never assume that I am just a woman who happens to be a little non-conforming. Um, and I think that has to do with the trans movement. It's no longer acceptable to be gender nonconforming. Like it's based on very sexist stereotypes. And I don't fit into those stereotypes. Therefore, i.e., I must be something other. So I feel that there's a lot more othering of gender nonconformity than there was maybe a decade ago, right? We thought we turned that corner, but we definitely haven't. And then at a really and this has happened to me before, like in gender critical spaces. So in spaces where people are well versed in this stuff, they still can't get it right either. I mean, it's not this recent conference I was at was not the first time people just assumed I was, I was, or am, or somehow trans identified. Like most people, uh, two people at the conference started talking to me as if I were a detransitioner. And one woman came up to me and I mean, I understand people are not everybody is worldly. Not everybody has met a lot of gender nonconforming people, but I just think that it's indicative of the problem remaining that gender nonconformity is still being othered, even in circles that are trying to stop the trans medicalization of minors and young adults. They still don't quite get it because I had someone she was very well meaning, so I don't want to make people think she wasn't well meaning. She said, I just want you to know you're so beautiful after all the harm that you've been through. And I just kind of was like, oh, no, she definitely was getting things wrong here. But she was like, I just want you to know you're beautiful. I'm sorry for everything you've been through. And I was just like, oh man, she thinks she thinks I had been on testosterone. I don't know whether she thinks I had been on. That's the thing is, I don't know. I don't know whether she thinks that I had been on testosterone as a woman or whether she thinks I'm a man who's been feminized. Like, who knows? All they know is I'm gender nonconforming, so I must be some sort of trans. And again, this was a well-meaning person.
Yeah.
This is someone at a conference specifically there because they want to help stop
Yeah.
the medicalization of children and young adults. And even they're even missing this whole piece of how, again, I'm just going to keep saying it until I'm blue in the face. Most gender nonconforming people are gay. We're just gay.
So let's talk about the phrase itself, gender nonconforming. So there's this phrase, gender nonconforming. People sometimes will just say GNC versus the concept of sex nonconforming. And I've heard you talk in the past about how you're going to still use gender nonconforming, not sex nonconforming, but that neither one really fits perfectly. Can you elaborate a little bit about not saying sex nonconforming?
Well, sex nonconforming, I think, is actually just pretty ridiculous because there's nothing about my physical body that does not conform with what a female is. Um, Gender nonconforming is a little better because it implies that I don't.
Go a little deeper. Go a little deeper though. What do you mean that there's nothing about your body that is not that isn't sex non-conforming versus conforming?
I mean, sex is just a biological reality. I am female, so I'm not. I mean, I would say if someone was sex non-conforming, maybe they have a DSD,
Got it. Okay.
right? Like that's how I look at it. Gender non-conforming makes a little bit more sense because it implies like gender I see as a set of stereotypes connected to your sexed body. Um, and I definitely don't fit those stereotypes, so I'll just go with gender non-conforming. Like I said, none of them are really um perfect, right? Because it's just like the outward presentation, maybe some of my physical mannerisms, maybe my assertiveness, but again, so many of the things that make people describe me as masculine could just as easily be attributed to a very feminine woman with the same personality traits.
Yeah.
So neither word is perfect, but I definitely prefer gender nonconforming to sex nonconforming. Like it's not like I have three vaginas, so you know.
I one of the things that I edited out when I was prepping for this was I do still have a tiny bit of concern that we're going to have to add an explicit rating to this podcast now that we're inviting you on as a host because
You might.
we might. Okay, so Lauren does not have three vaginas. Okay. Um, so another element about your background that I want to talk about a little bit. So you have worked with your hands in a trade in kind of your own business setting, solid working class background. Um, Yet college grad, philosophy. When you talk to others from that kind of class background, do you find that there's this difference in the response to the trans issue when you're talking to people from the non-elite class, and kind of what do those conversations look like?
Oh yeah, the working class people, they just get it. They haven't forgotten that there's a difference between men and women. They're definitely, if you're a woman working class, whether you're in a exclusively physical trade like I am, you're still in a position where like, okay, what if you work at a grocery store and you're on your feet all day and you have to stock some stuff. You still fundamentally know that a man can lift a heavier box than you. So I just think that like working class people um have no choice. Like they don't have the privilege to pretend that there's no difference because it's going to be much more pointed in their life. Um and I do think a lot of this comes from like I don't know who termed the current that coined the term luxury beliefs, but that is, that is what I see. Like, I do not have to go into the detail of explanation when I talk to regular working class people. I don't have to get into all these philosophical arguments. Like, they just get it because it's common sense.
They
It's
get what?
almost,
What
they
is the
get
common
that there's
sense
a
part?
difference between men and women. They get that, like, just saying you're a woman doesn't make you a woman. And they understand that, like, the bodies of children should not be interfered with. They get it. They just get it. Um, Whereas I think a lot of people are, they're just overeducated. They're overly cerebral, like you spent most of your adult life getting your PhD. And this is not to say everyone with a PhD is an idiot, but a lot of them are. Like it's, I'm sorry, but they are. They're surrounded and they're stewing in these like hypotheticals and these esoteric ideas that like just don't come down. They don't come down from that lofty, like analytical, intellectual place and put them in practical usage. Like some of these ideas that they're constantly discussing, they just don't make sense for regular people. They just are never going to make sense. They're not made to be applied to actual physical reality. They're thought experiments. They're just long, drawn out thought experiments that we're trying to manifest in this physical reality in this physical world, and it just doesn't translate.
Okay, I'm going to pivot. I'm going to go back a little bit. So you kind of started the use for a lot of us of that phrase, stop transing gay kids. Why do you think that that is a good way to frame this?
Because, and I just want to say, like, I know it is not just gay kids. I know that it is not. I know that we have created a monster and it is now devouring any vulnerable child, young adult, and adult. If there is any kind of vulnerability, this can pull you in, and within months, you could be in a totally different trajectory, and put on hormones and have life-altering surgeries. I understand it is not just gay kids. However, the trans rights slogans, trans women are women, trans rights are human rights. These are just they're just like, they're simple little catchphrases, and you can't get your point across if you're going to try to explain this whole phenomenon. Because if you were really going to explain this to every single person, it would be a 3-year lecture course. And you'd have to get into social contagion. You'd have to explain endocrinology. You'd have to explain DSTs. You'd have to explain postmodernism and queer theory and autism and porn. It's and oh, the institutions have been captured. You can't explain it to people and encapsulate it in a way that people, especially on the left, who are not getting all of this information ever, they're not gonna, first of all, they're not gonna listen to you that long, and you end up sounding like you should be wearing a tinfoil hat. But if you say most gender nonconforming kids grow up to be gay, people get it. I don't have to explain anymore. I've done this 100 times where I will say to people who are, they're normies. They're not entrenched in all of this. But they like gay people, they're fine with gay people, whatever, and they think trans people deserve all the same rights as everybody else, which I do too. Like, I don't think anyone should be discriminated against for their presentation or how they choose to identify. But when I say to these normal people who don't have the unofficial PhD that many of us do in what is going on, and I look at them and they're looking at me, and I am gender nonconforming. And I say, most gender nonconforming kids grow up to be gay. We are transing gay kids. We're transing the gay away. They immediately get it. Because again, up until yesterday, we all knew this. We all knew gender nonconformity strongly correlates with adult homosexuality.
And it's something that our parents knew as well.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Oh, my parents definitely knew. I mean,
Did
my
they?
my friends that were effeminate little boys, their parents knew.
So, if you're willing, was there anything in your childhood when that knowledge of the parents and your lack of knowledge and maybe a musician kind of collide?
Uh, Yeah, so I loved Melissa Etheridge. I still love Melissa Etheridge. If you're listening, we'd love for you to stick up for the little gay girls. Um, so I was like obsessed with Melissa Etheridge. This was the 90s. I was probably like 10 years old. I just was like, man, she rocks. She's awesome. Um, I didn't know what gay was. I didn't know that I was gay because I was 10. I basically was dressing the same way with the baseball cap and the t-shirt. But I didn't know what that meant. Like I wasn't old enough to have any sexuality, so I don't know any of this. I just thought she had great music. Um, and we were at a Thanksgiving dinner. My whole family, my entire family was at the dinner table, and they were like joking about it. They were like, "Of course she likes Melissa Etheridge." And I did not get the joke until like 7 years later. And I was like, "Wait a minute. You guys all knew." I mean, no one was surprised. When I came out to my family, it was pretty much like, yeah, no kidding. Great. Live your life. But yeah, adults know. Like or they at least assume. And I think for most adults, like once you hit puberty and you're not really interested in boys anymore and you're still not interested in wearing dresses, it kind of solidified it for them. I mean, like I said, I didn't know because I was too young to have any kind of sexual feelings for anyone, but they knew. But also in remembering that situation, when I did finally come to terms with myself, when I had my own realization, I knew that they knew, and I knew that it would probably be okay to tell them. Like I wasn't going to be ostracized. They were going to make fun of me, but we make fun of each other for everything. That's just how That's just how my family is.
So, we've talked about kind of this working class background. We talked about this phrase, stop transing gay kids. But there's one other element here, which is like you actually do have a philosophy background, that you
Yeah.
studied philosophy, that you studied literature. If you could imagine that you're stuck on an elevator ride with a kind of classic, progressive, liberal thinker, imagine you're stuck in the elevator with Ezra Klein, and you know that you kind of have to try to meet him where he's looking at this. Maybe they don't know the debate. Do you feel like there's something that you could say to him? How would you try to make your case on that
I
philosophical level?
I don't know that I would go to a philosophical level. I think my go-to is always going to be most gender nonconforming kids grow up to be gay. And every study we have about gender nonconformity says the same thing. Most will grow up to be homosexual. And it's very hard to argue with that when you're looking me in the eye. And I think that not only is it's very simple, but it's something that good liberals will understand and will want to get behind and are horrified when they have this realization. Like, wait a minute. Maybe there's something more to look at here. Because what I would say, if I really had to get into it, I would say, let me read you the criteria for childhood gender dysphoria. This criteria, you need to check 6 of these boxes to be considered clinically gender dysphoric. I could check all 8 as a child. Every single thing I liked, and they're also based on stereotypes. So I liked to play with trucks. I didn't want to wear dresses. I couldn't wait to grow up to be a handsome prince. I mean, all of these things, like I did all of these things. It's describing the criteria for childhood gender dysphoria describes me as a child. And I was distressed about it. I was distressed because I was different and I knew I was different. I wasn't like overly distressed because this is the 80s and 90s and nobody was decided that it was a great idea to give sex changes to kids then. But um
Or to teach kids to wallow in their own distress and ruminate in
right,
it and mirror it that way.
exactly.
Yeah, we also
Exactly.
do this. Instead, our parents told us, go outside, go away, come back when the street lights come on.
Yeah. And when I say I was distressed, I think the distress didn't happen for me until puberty because that's when, like, as a kid, it was fine to be a tomboy in the 80s. It was fine. Like, people were just like, oh, she's just a tomboy. And, like, my mom was always, very supportive of me. She always said I marched to the beat of my own drum while playing the violin. And so from her, I understood that it was okay for me to be a little bit weird and unique. So that was a gift that I was given as a child, right? But puberty, when all my girlfriends started liking boys and wanted to wear dresses and they wanted to wear makeup, I was not there. I still didn't wear dresses. I still didn't want to wear makeup. I wasn't having crushes on boys. In fact, I really struggled to understand how my friends changed so much because I
Huh.
wasn't changing in that way. And I also didn't have the understanding of like sexuality because that young, you're even at puberty, you're not really sexual, right? You don't really understand those things. So, but yeah, that's what I would talk to Ezra Klein about. Like, you want to be a good liberal, like you should be invested in lifelong health, and you should be invested in not surgically converting homosexual youth to look like simulacra of the opposite sex to conform better to society's standards and stereotypes. In summation.
Lauren, thank you for sharing some of your background today and for helping us kick off this relaunch of Informed Dissent. These are the kind of honest, unflinching, three vagina conversations we're going to try to bring you every week. For our listeners, thank you for tuning back in. Next week, our third and regular co-host, Cori Cohn, will be back with us after Rosh Hashanah. Again, we're going to be diving into a tale of two conferences, how SEGM and Genspect have both waded back into the debate over what belongs in the DSM and whether anyone from Genderland itself will actually even get a say in the next DSM. For subscribers, please know we're going to turn back on all of our subscriptions in 1 week after Cori rejoins us. Also, subscribers to Informed Dissent are going to be given a free subscription over to the LGBT Courage Coalition. The LGBT Courage Coalition is going to be sponsoring this podcast moving forward and taking care of all the production, the scheduling, the reaching out for any outside guests. Share this episode with a friend who needs to hear these conversations. And until next time, stay informed and not afraid to dissent. Thank you.